For the 27th problem on this first ACT practice test, what is the perimeter in inches of the isosceles right triangle shown below, whose hypotenuse is 8 times the square root of 2 inches long? So this triangle here, we know that it's isosceles and it has a right angle, and the hypotenuse, which is directly across from the right angle, this is 8 times the square root of 2 inches. Now, to figure out the perimeter, which is just the length around the outside edges of the triangle, we just need to know what this side and this side, what their lengths are. And since this is an isosceles right triangle, that means both of these legs are equal to each other. So what we can do is call each of these legs x, and then use the Pythagorean Theorem since we have a right triangle. And if you've forgotten the Pythagorean Theorem, it simply says that the legs of the triangle, when added together and squared, or in other words, x squared plus x squared, that they add up to the hypotenuse squared. So x squared, this side squared, plus this side squared is equal to 8 times the square root of 2, and then we'll square that. So all we have to do is solve this to figure out what our side length is. So we can combine these, since x squared plus x squared is just 2x squared. And when we square this, we're essentially squaring each of the factors in this product here. So we'll square 8 and we'll square the square root of 2. So we get 64, and then root 2 squared is just 2. So 8 times the square root of 2, when you square this, you get 64 times 2, which is just 128. So we have 2x squared is equal to 128. We'll finish over here. So dividing each side by 2, we have that x squared is equal to 64. And x, when we take a square root of each side, would be 8. And in reality, when you're taking square roots, you really need plus or minus whatever the square root of this number is. But since we're dealing with lengths, we can ignore the negative. So each of these sides we've just figured out is 8 inches. So let's write that up here. So this is 8, and this is 8 as well. So for the perimeter, all we have to do is add 8 plus 8 plus 8 root 2. Or in other words, 16 plus 8 times the square root of 2, which is choice letter E here. Now, this is essentially the long way to solve the problem. A much faster way is to recognize that this is a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Since if I were to draw one of those in general, so we have here this isosceles right triangle where both of these smaller angles are 45 degrees, and the third angle here is a right triangle. So what's unique about this type of triangle is that if this side length was A and this side length was A, you can immediately know that the hypotenuse is A times the square root of 2. And you can check this using the Pythagorean Theorem, but in general, it's true for any 45, 45, 90 triangle. So if we had some other one, which I'll draw real quick, and let's say we knew that the legs were each 3 inches, then you can immediately know that the hypotenuse is 3 times the square root of 2 inches. Or let's say you had it in reverse, where the hypotenuse was, let's say, 7 times the square root of 2, then you can know immediately that these sides are both just 7. So usually I would recommend against memorizing things, but since this is a time test and this type of triangle usually comes up a few times during the test, this is something that if you don't have memorized, it's definitely worth having in your mind going into the test. It will probably only save you a few seconds here and there, but with a problem like this, you can solve it in a few seconds versus maybe a minute if you have to actually carry out the Pythagorean Theorem. So that type of time saving is incredibly useful for when you get to the last 10 problems or so of the test. So anyways, with this particular problem, choice E here is our final answer.